I don't think it's always a good idea to connect two events when clearly there could be independent causes for both of them. But it's hard for me to believe that it's a complete coincidence that Donald Trump has authorized the release of classified FISA documents yesterday night, and this morning, Theresa May has resigned as Prime Minister of Britain. So I'll try to talk about both of those independently, and then I'll tie them together. Theresa May is the worst Prime Minister in the history of that position anywhere that I know. Now, granted, maybe we're a little jaded about modern times. Of course, people talk about Anthony Eden back in the 50s. People can talk. There have been some pretty bad leaders around the world throughout history that I'm talking about incompetence. I'm not talking about being a horrible person, but in terms of everything about being the leader of her country, Theresa May was a failure. And it says here that she had one job to deliver Brexit, which she failed to do. Yeah, that's one problem. But everything else in terms of Britain was a complete disaster under her. She couldn't find a way to fund the NHS. It was a total crisis over there. The culture of Britain became essentially one of fear. You have to remember that I think it was in 2017 there was a 2017 there was the London Bridge bombing, and it's essentially become a country that is living in fear all the time. And Theresa May was probably the worst person at calming spirits and giving people a reason to believe that the future is going to be any better than the past was. And that's, I think, the best the best assessment of how she led her country. She also was one of the people who, even before she was prime minister, she was prime minister. You have to remember she was Home Secretary before that. The Home Secretary in Britain is effectively in charge of the internal security over there. It could be analogous to our what's it called? Department of Homeland Security over here. So, like John Kelly was until very recently. So, Theresa May has been an overseer of the system of the police state over there, the political police state, both as Home Secretary and Prime Minister. And rather than make Britain a country where people are able to coexist together of diverse backgrounds, which is supposedly what the globalist neoconservatives want. She's made it, a country that people think, people are now getting their spoons confiscated by the police because they're considered effectively a weapon, a knife. So yeah, I think Theresa May will go down as one of the worst leaders in British history, maybe in world history, possibly the worst of all of them in terms of competence. Another thing people should remember, so in the context of Brexit, yes, she was groveling to the EU. She would just fly back and forth to talk to Merkel and to Michel Barnier and Juncker, Jean-Claude Juncker, Guy Verhofstadt. So if I was in the position of a British citizen, I would say that it's basically, all's end that ends well. That's the best you can hope for. They're not going to miss her. I've never heard a British person praise Theresa May. So about the FISA declassification. So before I connect that to it, we have to realize what are going to be the ramifications of it. So for 2 years, this is something that people might ask now. Why declassify FISA now? And I tried making a video about it yesterday, and when it uploaded, and then it wouldn't process for whatever reason. I uploaded it from the tablet. So Theresa May, or sorry, this declassification has essentially meant the end of the myth of any sort of underlying cause to start an investigation of the Trump campaign. And why did it take until now? The most simple answer I can come up with is Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions in 2017 recused himself after the Democrats pressured him with the nonsense about, oh, you met the ambassador all these places. That means you're compromised and you have to recuse yourself from the investigation. Well, because Jeff Sessions recused himself, who was the person who, once Comey was fired, ended up ordering the opening of a new investigation with a special counsel? Rod Rosenstein. If Sessions had not recused himself, the Mueller probe would never have happened, and very likely this thing would have probably been nipped at the bud, and much less pain would have happened as a result of the Trump-Russia investigation or lack thereof. The congressional committees would have wrapped up quickly. Of course, things rarely go as easy as they should in politics, but so for 2 years. So the reason likely that they decided not to declassify the documents was once the investigation started, it would have been a good grounds for the Democrats to call for impeachment and campaign on impeachment, because they would say essentially that Donald Trump had pulled the rug out on a legal process and therefore it was obstruction of justice. They could say that here, in fact, you do have an act that the president is trying to, do an end around the Department of Justice and the special counsel. So my suspicion is that he was advised by his lawyers, whether it was Ty Cobb or Rudy Giuliani, possibly Jay Sekulow, not to do the FISA release until the Mueller report was concluded. But because Jeff Sessions wouldn't unrecuse himself and take charge of the Mueller investigation again, it was Rod Rosenstein that was the person in charge for about 2 years, and Rosenstein himself was implicated as one of the people who signed the FISA warrants and was complicit in this campaign of political espionage that the government engaged in against a political candidate and eventually a president. So that is the best explanation. So once Jeff Sessions had resigned and Trump had to go through, people forget there were 3 or 4 months where there was an acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker. Matt Whitaker also didn't have the authority invested. Technically, legally, he did have the authority, but in terms of being a full attorney general, in terms of having the confidence and the confirmation of the Senate, it could not have been an acceptable act for him to declassify the FISA abuse memos. And Rosenstein was still charged with managing the Russia probe, managing the Mueller investigation. Then Barr gets confirmed, Barr the Barbarian, as I call him, and he decides, well, we're going to look into whether these processes, the actual underlying processes that led to the Russia investigation, were legitimate. So he does that. He also, I believe, went to Robert Mueller because he doesn't have to recuse himself anymore. You have to understand this. William Barr was not personally conflicted with the Russia investigation the way any of the other people involved were, although Whitaker, you could say, probably wasn't either, but he just didn't have the authority, the PR authority to do it. So you had to have somebody like William Barr go there and say, hey, Robert Mueller, it's time for you to either show that you have something or leave. And Mueller did wrap up his report, and he did end up having it validated by by Rod Rosenstein. So once that was over and it got released and then you put it out there. Of course, now they're complaining about the redactions. Once that had happened, now you say, well, what else can be ruined by putting out this FISA information? What else can be ruined by putting out all of these issues of how this happened, and how this George Papadopoulos, this guy who had nothing to do with Russia, came to be used as an excuse to open the probe? Or if it was Carter Page, which is almost as ridiculous, because Page had been somebody. But by the way, people already know a lot of the facts that are coming out. That George, because these things have been reported, they just haven't been reported by the whole media. So Carter Page had never been a Russian agent. In fact, he had at one point reported Russian infiltration to the FBI. He had never actually, so they reported somebody who had cooperated with the FBI as a Russian asset. Think about how ridiculous this is. And he'd worked with the FBI during the Obama administration. So I'd like you to make sense of that. And with George Papadopoulos, what you're going to see is confirmation that the CIA or the FBI, well, the FBI is for sure connected. They decided to target this guy in order to create this smoke about Trump being connected to Russia, even though all of the people he contacted, if you look at interviews with him on Mark Stein and on Michael Tracy's show, the other person I think who interviewed him is Flecka, and then Dan Bongino. I think of the four, I've listened to all of them but Michael Tracy. The whole story is ridiculous, and it shows that, if anything, he was only contacted by Western intelligence agencies. And that's where we get back to the question of Theresa May resigning today of all days. We are going to see that in the very near future, it will be shown that the British government, the so-called conservative government, was complicit in a world intelligence community plot to affect the political process. And this was something that May and the British government had wanted to keep hush-hush. They knew that it would show them to be the deep state ghouls that they are. They don't the top level of government in Britain doesn't really represent their constituencies. They don't represent the people that send them to Whitehall, to the Parliament. They represent the services and agencies that are basically filtering thought and information in the modern world. That's who they are. That's one of the reasons that Theresa May, I believe, decided today to resign as Prime Minister, because now people know that she wasn't really representing the political platform of any party or movement. What was conservative about the Theresa May government? I don't know. It was mostly something about, it was almost as if you were seeing the Hillary Clinton presidency if that had happened. Incompetence, constant claiming that others are not fit for her position, and then, in some cases, just complete arrogance. She was horrible. And it could be that she will lead to a Jeremy Corbyn prime minister position. You could see Jeremy Corbyn succeed her eventually, although in the short term it's going to be probably one of the other Conservative Party leaders. So yeah, we are seeing the demise of the group of leaders and agency heads that were responsible for the 2016 shenanigans, and it's about time. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Especially subscribe to me on Minds, that's at Chef Leopard, and on BitChute, also Chef Leopard. You can contribute to me if you want on Subscribestar. Screen name there is also Chef Leopard, and on Gab, you can find me there at Starscream85.